Hey, Whiskey Ringers, more updates coming your way. First off, the Jack Daniels barrels are totally sold out. These went in about a week and a half at most. If you haven't received your bottle stickers, please reach out to me with your address and how many you got, and I'll be happy to get those to you as soon as possible. Next up, our current single barrel, the Podcaster Yak Attack, a barrel rye finished in Armagnac casks, picked in partnership with This Is My Bourbon Podcast, is live and available on my site. You can go to stores.mashnetworks.co, that's .co/WIMWR. That's WIMWR for Whiskey in My Wedding Ring. Patrons get first access to this one too, and got free shipping alongside it. The next barrel pick that's scheduled is a toasted oat whiskey from Spirits of French Lick, which should be available in about February and will also go through the same store. Also have a few picks rolling around right now that might pop up in the next few months. Best way to get first access, first knowledge of these things, special benefits, and codes for these bottles is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/whiskeyinmyweddingring. You can support for as little as $1 a month with tiers at $5, $15, and $25. The $15 and $25 tiers also come with the opportunity to not only get samples from me, but the $25 tier lets you join me for barrel picks, whether they're in person or virtual. And with a lot of barrel picks hopefully coming down the line, this is the best time to sign up. There are just a few spots left at those top tiers, so if you're interested, don't miss out. Sign up now. Finally, I am thrilled to welcome Black Button Distilling out of Rochester, New York as my newest sponsor. They've just opened a beautiful new facility, and I got to visit, tour around, and do an on-site episode that'll come out later this month. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for supporting. Sign up on Patreon and rate and review wherever you can. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Whiskey Ring podcast. Today, we are taking a slight break from the liquid itself, and we're talking more about the barrel. Now, if you remember back 2.5 years ago, we had Quercus Cooperage on to talk then. I'd like to think a hell of a lot more to talk about now. So I'm thrilled to bring on John Cox of Quercus Cooperage up in New York. So we're sticking with the New York theme as well. So John, welcome on.
Oh, hi guys. Thanks for having me.
So,
hi everybody.
Yeah, of course. So, one of the reasons we got connected, we have a mutual friend who invited me to an event that you're going to be holding. And I wanted to start off with that event. I'm not going to be able to make it just because I'm going to be out of town for that week. Mm-hmm. But this event is going to be at Kings County in November. So I wanted to throw it to you to promote that event for...
Yeah, I'm coming back to Brooklyn. We had a shop for a long time downtown Brooklyn near BAM. And we're going to come down to Kings County Distillery. I do an hour and a half lecture and presentation. Half of it is barrel lore and history from Caesar to today. And the other half is my process of making barrels using hand and mid-20th century furniture machines. Awesome. And I present that, and I've been doing more of it. And I'm teaming up with our mutual friend, and Leah, and to do my presentation, and then she'll be doing some of her work with the tastings of some of Kings County's products.
Awesome. And that's going to be on November 10th, I believe, right?
Right. Friday. Yeah, I think 7:00. Kings County, they have a great place down the Brooklyn Navy Yard, not too far from where we used to have our shop. And if you get a chance, you can find out more information on my Instagram page, or I'm sure link through your stuff. Yep. I'm looking forward to working with her, and we're going to try to do some more shows together.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have a link in the show notes. I'll put out a reminder. Like I said, I'm going to be in California, but I'll put a reminder for people to hop over to Kings County. They're also friends of the podcast. Our mutual friend Leah, also a friend of the podcast. She runs Barrel Strength Talent.
Yeah, she's great, and and it's a lot of fun. I tell a funny, humorous story, the history of man's use of the barrel and how important it was to our ancestors, not just for food and liquid, but for commerce, exploration, warfare, colonization. It's links to slavery and every post-colonial industry from tobacco, cotton, whaling, oil, all relied heavily on it. And maybe we'll get into some of that later today. But the barrel is more than just to age whiskey in, our ancestors would not have survived or even traveled. There would be no Vikings, at least nautical Vikings, without barrels of water and food to keep them alive on the boat. And so it's very important to our history. But because of the Industrial Revolution and corrugated cardboard and the shipping container, prohibition, all these things put a death knell to what was once a very flourishing. And I believe in 1900 there was 91 million people, and there were about 91 million barrels in America at the time. So our ancestors were, really, it was a really integral part of their life.
So to jump back.
Yeah. Sorry.
No. We're good. We're definitely going to go into that. I just want to start with, how did you come into cooperage?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I'm from Philadelphia. You'll notice how I say water and what it is. And so I'm from South Philly, and I was going to Temple studying jazz, Temple Music School, college, and I met a flamenco guitar maker. He introduced me to the world of luthier and woodworking, and I started off when I was a teen working in his shop, and eventually, and for the next 32 years, worked for different studio furniture and cabinet makers, doing fabrication and finishing. We've worked for many famous artists. We had a 13-man cabinet shop in downtown Brooklyn throughout the 90s up until 9/11. After 9/11, I decided to move to upstate New York. And we were still doing interiors, and somebody told me that there was a barrel crisis. This was 2014. Where were you in the barrel crisis of 2014? And I was very intrigued, and I really wanted to get out of the chemicals and a lot of the our interior work. There's a lot of lacquer and chemical spraying. And I became very intrigued. I saw an article in Time magazine. Remember that? Time magazine.
Yeah.
And about the barrel shortage. And mostly what it was is the craft distilling movement was really taking off, and they needed barrels, and they just weren't ready for the onslaught of the Washington distilleries and New York distilleries. So when I got in, there was almost a 2-year wait, which I think we're back to now. But there was a big backlog, and I'm here in the Hudson Valley. That's an hour and a half north of New York City, for those of you who aren't familiar. And we're sort of the breadbasket of New York City. We're right up the Hudson River, and there's a lot of distilleries, including mostly Tuttletown, Hudson whiskey, and so it was really in the air up here, and I was very intrigued to start coopering. And then I started a process, which I can talk to you about trying to figure it out, because it is a mysterious practice. I don't know, it was very hard to find any information on. That's probably some of your listeners might know.
It does seem, even now, with talking to so many people who are in whiskey and in spirits, and it does seem somewhat magical in a way. You're using only wood, and you have to make it, of course, watertight.
Right, wood, six hoops and 12 rivets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Usually no other, metals or glues or adhesives, sealants.
No glues, no nails, no fasteners. We do have some secret things we're allowed to use, but so that's what it is, right? It's about 32 pieces of wood, 6 hoops, 12 rivets, and you're off to the races. And as opposed to practically every other field or product, there is tons of information. I'm sure if I wanted to make an airplane, I could find the specs online, but there was nothing online, which intrigued me even more. So it was 2015. We had a cabinet shop here. So, we're making things, we're running machines, we're milling, making custom work. I bought a few barrels, one from Barrel Mill, one from Black Swan, I had Barrel 59. I can't remember all of them. And I took them apart and tried to figure out how they were made, and why all the staves were different sizes, and how many they used, and how they cut the angle. And I was investigating all that when I had a breakthrough, and I bought a large collection of 18th and 19th century hand tools, coopering tools, which are very unique. We'll talk about that in a minute. From a museum in Ottawa that was deassessing their collection. They had quite a collection. They had, almost every tool. It was almost like they had all the hand tools from a cooperage up there. And so having taken them apart and then seeing the tools and seeing how they made these and seeing, the tools showed me what we call knives. If I was going to make you a custom crown molding for your restoring your 19th century home, we would get knives made for our shapers, and then we would mill the wood and we would have that profile. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, how can I adjust the machinery? I had to do that. And I approached the stave as, a custom project. I was also very clear not to try to reinvent anything. I let these tools tell the story. I could see the knife, and instead of having a large hand plane, I could put it onto my shaper. A shaper is like a large router that's spinning with a knife head in it. And so I broke the whole system down into 5 systems, trying to figure out each one. And the hand tools really helped me. I spent a few days with Russ at Black Swan at the time. I guess this was about 10 years ago, who also came at it from a cabinet making background. And he was very helpful in telling me what I didn't need and where the bottlenecks were going to be. It took me about 2 years. We finally held water on like the winter solstice, I think of 2016. And that was quite a day. So yeah, I used the tools and the reverse engineering to teach me. I bought a machine to roll the hoops. That was one of the machines I purchased from Slovenia. If you see some of these larger automated cooperages, a lot of their machinery comes from Eastern Europe or Slovenia. These custom coopering tools from these companies. And that was the one thing I bought. But I didn't try to CNC anything, and I didn't try to use really any modern technology other than mid-20th century, furniture making machinery, what we call like stationary machinery, large machinery. And we were able to figure it out. In the meantime, I was buying local New York wood and aging it, and then sourcing the steel. So yeah, that's how I approached it. And I had a lot of interest from everybody around here who wanted local wood, local terroir. Because I'm small, I'm able to sort of harvest my own wood, or at least I did. I now do get some stuff from stave mills, and we can talk about that and the trickiness of all that. So yeah, that's my story. I transitioned from custom fabrication and interiors to being a cooper, and really dove deep. And my lecture and the things I talk about, the historical stuff, are all things that I discovered along the way as I unraveled this onion. It was very interesting. And what was interesting was the lexicography, all the words we get in our language from barrel making and the surrounding jobs around it. And also how integral it was to almost every post-industrial industry. The ability to hold pelts, the ability to ship nails, the ability to, move glass or move flour or cement. And, we didn't have sheet goods. We didn't have cardboard. We didn't have, thick bags. There was paper bags, obviously, but they're not going to really hold up or be waterproof. So it was quite a conundrum, and the barrel filled all those gaps. And the minute they could get away from the barrel, which is very hard to, make and use, they did. And by that, I mean a steel drum or a shipping container or corrugated cardboard. And you can tell I really have it out for the corrugated cardboard people. In fact, we're talking about Kings County. They're right in New York and Brooklyn, in the Dumbo neighborhood of Brooklyn. If you've ever seen Dumbo, it's a few large brick buildings between the Manhattan and Brooklyn Bridge. And that was actually the Robert Gare cardboard factory. It was a patrician company. They had about 9 to 11 buildings. And they didn't invent cardboard, but they propagated it through the Industrial Revolution and all those buildings there in Dumbo.
And so the first question I thought of was, in reverse engineering the barrels. You're obviously coming from a background where you have dealt with furniture making, fabrication, so you can tell how systems go together. But the way you described it was very what I would call engineer like. You're breaking it down into systems, and then how do those systems back into each other?
So my systems were like the wood procurement and the aging. I don't know if most of the listeners know, but so here let's talk about the 5 systems that I broke it down to. And the first one was wood procurement and aging. It's quarter sawn white oak. White oak is known as Quercus alba. That's where the name of my company comes from. Quarter sawn white oak. And most mills, or anybody who's familiar with seeing somebody mill a log, it's a gentleman with a large chainsaw, and he's cutting large slabs. That's flat sawn wood. Coopers can't use that. We need quarter sawn, which means the log is actually cut into quarters. So that adds a challenge right there. Then that wood needs to be aged for at least 2 years. I think at Kelvin, they speed it up a little bit and everybody has their tricks, but it needs to be aged. If I was going to build you a dining table or a kitchen, I would call my lumberyard and they would send me kiln dried wood. That means that wood has gone into a kiln and the interior structure of the wood is sort of crystallized in the heat and it's not going to warp and bend. So a cooper and boat builders can't use that wood because you can't bend it. So the wood needs to be air dried. And I can get into the nerdy details of that if you wanted. But, a lot of distillers think we're doing it just to release the tannins and season it for them. But honestly, what we're really doing is trying to lower the moisture content so we can bend it. If you will, the wood is imagine a piece of wood as a bundle of straws. And that straws are held together with a gelatinous material. And that gelatinous material is called lignin. And that's why a tree sways in the wind. That's why if you take a branch of a tree and try to break it, it doesn't break, it bends. And that's because the cell structure is all linked together with this lignin. When that wood's put in the kiln, the lignin is crystallized, making the wood very stable and hard, while also lowering the moisture content. I have to let the moisture content drop, I being the cooper, without the lignin being crystallized. So that's really why we're aging the wood. It is not seasoning for the distiller. Even though that is a byproduct of the process, it is not why we are doing it. If we had made barrels out of that fresh wood, it would be completely astringent because it would be very tannin rich. It would be like making tea with 10 tea bags. So it is important for our end user for us to lower the tannins. So there's 2 things happening, right? The moisture content's going down, the lignin isn't hardening, and we're lowering the tannin content of the wood. So that was the first system. The second one was making the staves and being able to bend them into the shape. So that involved how we figured out the angle. The barrel stave, and you can see it behind you, is thick in the middle and tapers on both ends symmetrically. It's wider in the middle. I can get into why that is with you if you want. And
go for it.
Sure. So I make barrels and tanks. A barrel is going to have that quintessential shape, a barrel shape where it's bilged in the middle and it gets smaller on both ends, right? We can all picture what that is, obviously. And then there's tanks, and you've seen some of the fermenting tanks that people have, and where it's just straight, the sides are straight, there's no bilge. If you can imagine an American football, and if you unstitch that football, you'd have 4 pieces of leather, almost like a wide diamond. Can you picture that?
Yeah.
As you stitch those 4 wide diamonds together, you get this football shape, which has a bilge in the middle. And in fact, if you cut the ends off of football, you'd really have a barrel shape. It's just taken out there to the end. If those 4 pieces of leather were rectangles and we stitched them together, we would have a tube or a can or a tank. So because the barrel stave has a bilge in the middle, we create a polygon, a shape that has a bilge in the middle. And if those staves did not have that bilge, we would be creating a tank or a silo or a water tower on a New York City rooftop or a small fermenting tank. And so that's what coopers do. They use staves and steel to hold liquid in, and it can either have a bilge in the middle or not. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. So I had to figure out how to not only put the angle on the side of the stave, but also how to have the bilge and then how to bend the barrel together. Before we go any further, I should explain kind of what coopering is. Do you mind? We'll pause at stage 2 and we'll talk about coopering. And coopering is the art of, it's one of the ancient arts of creating a polygon. I'll use the term polygon, I mean a shape. Using a polygon, creating angles cut on both sides. That might sound very confusing to everybody, but you actually have this all over your home with a picture frame. A picture frame is 4 pieces of wood cut at 45-degree angles that go together. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if they weren't 45, if they were 42 degrees or 48 degrees, that frame wouldn't go together. And we get that number from a very rudimentary mathematical formula. If you can imagine a circle with a square in the circle. So the circle represents 360 degrees, okay? Mm-hmm. If I take the number 4, because that's how many sides my square has, and I divide that into 360, I get 90 degrees, right? And if I take that 90 and I divide by 2, because there's 2 ends on each piece of wood, I get the number 45. So if I want to create a 4-sided polygon inside of a circle, I need to cut 45-degree angles. Does that make sense?
Yep.
If I want to make a 6-sided polygon inside of that circle, it's 30 degrees, and so on and so forth. So if a barrel has 32 staves, I'm dividing 32 into 360 divided by 2. So the same way we make a picture frame is the same way a barrel goes together, right? So that's the basis of Cooper joinery, and that's why I'm called a Cooper, because I use Cooper joinery. With the ancient arts, you were named after what you did. The millers milled, the sawyers sawn, the bakers baked, and the coopers used coopered joinery. This is different joinery from building a house or building furniture, and it's sort of similar, but it's different from building a boat. So our ancestors relied on coopers for a lot of their needs, and it was a very important trade throughout history. Most towns would have 2 or 3 cooperages. That was usually on the road called Cooper Road. If you have a Cooper Road in your town, it's probably near Sawmill Road, because the Coopers weren't that far from the mill. And if you know anyone named Cooper, that's what their ancestors did. In Germany, the barrel is Fass. So anyone named Fassbender, that's what their ancestors did. In French, and I always butcher it in French, Tonnellerie is a surname used for people who made barrels. And almost every language, Japan and Eastern Europe, Russia, has names for those who make the barrels. Okay, so that was my stage 2, learning how to cooper wood, learning how to cut, defining the angle, and bending into a barrel-like shape. The third process involved the toasting and the charring, which is going to be very important to my clients, and how to toast and char the barrel properly. The 5th was the procurement and bending of the hoops, and not just the hoops that you see on your barrel, but what we call our working hoops, which are the clamps we use during the process of our barrel making. And the 5th step was making the heads and installing that into the cask. And that includes cutting the chime and crows. If any of your listeners have ever taken a barrel apart, on the ends of the staves are a series of cuts. One looks like a scoop, the other looks like a groove. The top has a straight cut, and that's called the chime and crows. That used to be almost a singular profession for a while, crowsers who would do that process. And that's really where you're going to get your leaks in your barrel if your head isn't the proper size and not fitting in the crows properly. If you have a water balloon and you poke a hole in that water balloon, all the water will come out. And if that same hole is in a barrel, all that whiskey will come out. And boy, do they get mad when that happens. So those are the 5 processes I had to figure out. I had to figure them out separately, and I had to have them all intact before I could put them together. I couldn't bend the wood until I had the hoops, and I couldn't really make the hoops until I knew the shape of my barrel. We couldn't make the heads until I figured out the crows. We couldn't do any of that until the wood was aged. So when I got those 5 things together, I could then move forward and actually produce a barrel. I started making firkins, which are traditional British ale barrels. They're about 9 gallons. And then I went to 30s, and I stayed at 30s. There was a lot of young distilleries around me who liked the 30 because they get their stuff out quicker. And the wood for 53s is much more expensive and longer. So I set up all my jigs and my production to solely make 30-gallon barrels. And that's what we did. And I started making barrels for companies like Stoutridge Distillery here in New York, places like Hollerhorn and some other ones who used my barrels early on. And then because of my background in fabrication and repair, I started doing repair work. I could make a head for a punch-in. We could fix leaks. And I became more of a full-service cooperage, not just a barrel factory making 153-gallon barrels a day. And that's sort of the lane I've cut for myself. And I also make tanks, which we can talk about. So I'm sort of filling in all the gaps around the mass-produced barrels.
When you were looking at these, I think you said 5 barrels. So you originally got from places like Black Swan.
Yeah.
And you took them back. Were there significant differences between those 5 barrels?
Yeah, there was different let's see. So we took the rings off, and each of them had different rings, the steel, but they all had what's called a cant or an angle to them. So that was very interesting. I realized that the barrel hoop wasn't just a circle, but we call it a cant. If you can imagine a conical section, a tapered ring. So I immediately noticed that. When taking the heads apart, yes, the staves are different thicknesses, the crozes were different, and they all had different widths. So I wrote down and numbered each stave and what their size was, and then I could see it was like a cipher. I could see, they have 5 different size staves, and they have this many of this number and that many of that number, and so I started figuring that out. And when I met Russ at Black Swan, he filled in some of the gaps on why that was and how to arrange that to get the circumferences I need. Again, I talked about these working hoops. So I start with these hoops. They're almost like clamps. So my wood has to fit into those clamps in a specific manner. Am I making sense with all this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's see, we went through the hoops being different, the crozes being different.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm delving more into the like the mindset of someone who's looking at this new challenge.
Oh yeah, right.
Trying to figure out how to construct a barrel. You've got 5 examples that in some ways are very similar, but also have distinct differences between them. How did you
one of the things it taught me was like, okay, well, these chimes and crozes are different. And I knew a lot of them were being made on these large machines, which I did not have. And I knew I had to do it by hand and not automated. So I guess that showed me a freedom, like, okay, I'm going to make my chime and crows the way I want to make it. It's kind of similar to this one, but it doesn't really look like that one. So it gave me the liberty to know that, every chime and crows doesn't have to look the same, And, some barrels have much more of a bilge than others. Some are almost like tank-like. So I decided not to put a huge bilge on it because that means more pressure to bend the barrel. And I also, had to find where I could get the steel and the rivets. and we do that all by hand. There's a lot of hammering. I don't have a hoop driver. We do it all by hand. So, I made some concessions or to do it so I could fabricate them with my rudimentary machinery and my hands rather than relying on automated machinery. So, yeah, and I was really happy. The one nice thing we got was a laser engraver, so I could put people's logos in the barrel heads. That was the only modern technology because all the distilleries like to see their logo on it. And
can't argue against that.
yeah, right, yeah, because it becomes decor in these distilleries also. So yeah, that was the mindset, and it was also about thicknesses. How thick are their staves? You get to a point where it's too thin and it'll break, or it's too thick and you can't bend it. So figuring all that out, and then going backwards and figuring out how I want my staves milled as they're air drying. What length, what thickness, what width. So yeah, so everything kind of changed all the other systems. It relies on one thing, and then we got to change it because of the other. And I don't know if that makes sense, but eventually I figured out how I wanted to make my barrel, which was in relation to how my ancestors did it, but also in relation to my machinery that I had.
And just to give a little more context as well, so there are, you alluded to before, there are not a lot of cooperages, and very few coopers.
Right. Yes, I'm one of the last. Yeah. So when I got in, there was 33 cooperages. I think some closed during the pandemic. I believe there's only 3 other like me who are doing it by hand. Like most woodworking industries, it's become automated. And we see that across the board in woodworking and a lot of other trades, but that's just my trade. So that's what I look at. So yes, it's become automated. And unfortunately, in this capitalistic society, which I am part of and enjoy, there's also people who want to, I have competitors who want to stop me or at least put hurdles in my way to make it harder for me. And but because I stayed fleet and small, and because I'm building washbacks and doing repair and stuff, I've kind of found my lane, which hopefully is non-threatening. Yeah, so there's not many Coopers, and even the ones they are, and I'm sure they're all wonderful men, but when it gets automated like that, you're just sort of teaching people how to operate a specific machinery. That machine could be making padlocks or plastic, or so the people who work in those factories aren't getting a full rounded apprenticeship in barrel making. They're just really learning how to operate the machinery that they stand at. So yes, I'm in very rarefied air here, holding on to this trade and keeping it going. Yeah.
And as you also alluded to, there's such a history with barrel making. I won't have you tell the whole thing, just because obviously we want for the people going to the event to know more. But between, let's say, through the history of the barrel, so from the Celts of 2,000 years ago to today, what parts of that history, whether it be events or changes in technology or anything, what seems to draw your attention most when you're looking at the history of barrels?
Just as important, and just its import in warfare, exploration, early American industries. It just fascinated me. It's the birth of the Sicilian mob. It's all this ancient history in the Middle Ages. It's Nelson Rockefeller and Standard Oil and the whaling industry and the lengths that our ancestors went through, like Napoleon and the Secretary of the Navy to procure oak forests, and just the lengths that they went through for this commodity and the commodities that it held. Without a barrel, you're not going to get a whole lot of gunpowder to the front or keep it dry on a boat. So now we don't have gunpowder, and we don't have potable water, and we're trying to cross the Atlantic. There's only so many animal bladders you can fill with water for a transatlantic trip on a retired commercial an old merchant vessel, which the Mayflower was, decommissioned merchant vessel. So just those two things right there would have never happened without that. And then you see the tobacco industry and the cotton industry, and chattel slavery, and the whiskey rebellion, and all these things. And if you take the barrel out of that story, there's no story. They're not going to boil blubber on board of a whaler and put it anywhere. What are you going to do with hot whale oil?
You need somewhere to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, oil starts bubbling out of the ground in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Paul, what are we going to do with all this oil? There's no plastic containers. There's no steel drums. There's a few old whiskey barrels. So I found all that so fascinating. And then the tanks to hold that oil, and I talk about this a lot in the lecture, and I have a lot of photographs, and even how to irrigate, how to move water, how our ancestors moved water, not only under the city streets, but across mountaintops to explore into the West. And just every time you unpeel a layer, it's just fascinating. Warfare relies on men and alcohol. Caesar needed wine for his Roman centurions. The French needed wine in World War II. Even Americans are drinking Bud Light in Afghanistan. All throughout history, we have soldiers needing alcohol. So, how are you going to bring wine across Europe? How are you going to? So without that, without warfare and alcohol, it sounds silly, but it was just very important for so many aspects of our ancestors' lives, especially because, and I think we forget about this a lot, almost all the exploration, commerce, and everything that happened in the, let's say from the 16th to 20th century, relied heavily on nautical, commerce and trade, and being able to keep those sailors fed and drank and to move their commerce. It all relied heavily on that and getting that on and off of ships. Now it's sort of blind to us because we just see trucks and trains and cars, but our ancestors really relied heavily on nautical, I can't think of the word I want to find, but boats.
For sure. It's there's two books that I have on my kind of wish list right now that I have to get to at some point, and I'm about a year behind on my reading list. But one of them, or both of them, I should say, are about the history of oak in particular, as it relates to the history of the human race and to our development. And it hits on, as far as I can tell, I haven't read it, but as far as I can tell, it hits on a lot of these points that you're making about history, food, commerce, warfare, storage, movement of goods. It's
colonization,
so
the industry to build that up. And
yeah.
and even and the acorn, you can go off into the acorn too, and the food that provides to the forest floor, to the animals that rely on that, and then that whole circle of life of forest animals, and how if you take the acorn out of that, you're going to remove a lot of species who rely on that.
Absolutely. And so I do want to bring up a topic that you mentioned earlier, which was the idea of a barrel shortage.
Right.
Now, as you said, in 2014, 15, 16, when you're starting up and you're thinking about this idea, yes, craft whiskey was just booming out of nowhere. It seemed everyone was caught off guard. The coopers, the millers, the farmers, everyone was caught off guard. Because of that, there was definitely a dearth of barrels. Now, to me at least, it seems as though the shortage of barrels themselves has somewhat stabilized. There's still a waiting period, to be sure, but there are either enough barrels, but there's certainly enough wood. And I've been talking about this with a friend of mine who also does another podcast, and at least closer to where he is. So he's in Western Kentucky, so he's closer to
Hmm.
Ozark Wood and Missouri and all of that,
Yeah.
and of course all the cooperage at the distilleries in Kentucky.
Yeah.
So for him, his perspective was that it's not so much that we have a lack of barrels or even of wood; it's that we have a lack of loggers. There's not enough people who are going into logging as a profession.
Yeah, that was the excuse that we heard in 2015, which I guess, they said there was raining and they couldn't get to the logs, but it does seem like there's something else maybe going on. This shortage, which is there's a huge shortage right now in 53s,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems different than the first shortage of 2014. The 2004, to me, I mean, and this industry better, but this was my observation that in 2014, they just had to really scale up to meet demand. And then they did that. But now the demand is almost global. Used to hear like, oh, Heaven Hill filled their millionth barrel, and now they want to fill like 1 million barrels a year,
Mm-hmm.
and China wants barrels and India wants barrels. It's almost like I don't know if you can solve this one by just scaling up. The demand has gotten so great that what we're producing is at such a higher level, where before it was because New York had all of a sudden 25 and then 50 and then 100 craft distillers. But I mean, how many barrels are they really using? But now the big guys seem like they're producing 1 million barrels a year. So it just seems like the demand is growing, and those guys do seem to be controlling the forests and the stuff. But it's hard because I do feel pressure. I have been shut out of some of my stave mills by some of the global conglomerates, and there's these stories, and I can't say that they're true, but many people have told me, but the big cooperages would buy a small cooperage and then just put all the machines outside or put them in a warehouse and not let them get out into the market where people like me can get their hands on them.
Mm-hmm.
So, somewhere there's a warehouse with 3 different cooperages machinery in there, So that bothers me that I can't get some of this machinery that nobody wants. These guys are automated. Kelvin doesn't looking for a hoop driver from the 1940s.
Sure.
They have a digital robot who pushes it down. So it does. I do feel like some of the bigger people, who I hope don't listen to this, are going out of their way to make sure that other people like me can't survive or propagate. And I've been locked out of steel mills, stave mills where I get my staves because international conglomerates have bought them, and they don't want to sell it to me. So that's kind of more reason why I'm one of the last, because it gets very hard. And if I wanted to grow, I would probably, which I don't, but I would probably face even more of an uphill battle.
That leads into another one of my questions, which was, it was going to be what's your current capacity and where do you want to get to? But since you sound like you're at where you want to be, what is your current capacity for?
Well, it changes. Some weeks we're just doing tanks. I usually do about 8 a week, but I don't really. We've been doing a lot of recouping lately and actually sending those overseas, and I can talk a little bit about that. I've been doing a lot of recouping, but my capacity is not very large. We'll get an order for large tanks, and I just have a few distillers that I take care of. But even the landscape here in Hudson Valley is changing. So I just try to change with it. It was hard when the pandemic hit because all my distillers stopped distilling. They started making hand sanitizer, and none of them would barrel age it, as opposed, which I begged for. No. And, so for about 1.5 years, most of my guys weren't even producing. We pivoted into the culinary world, and I shrunk my open top fermenters down to cater to some of the culinary trends that were going on around shoyu and koji. And I found the needs for coopering was very strong there, especially during the pandemic. But now my distillers are back, and we are producing, but we're also doing a lot of recouping. I don't think I'm one of probably the only person shop in America maybe right now that's doing a recouping the way we're doing it, and those barrels can be sent overseas because they don't have the same federal regulations that coopers and distillers have here. I mean, and we should mention this, right? I'm sure most in your audience know this, but the thing about coopering and why there's a shortage is because that the American distiller is federally mandated to use, and it says new charred oak barrel. So whether you're Maker's Mark or your Joey mom and pop distillery in New Jersey, you can only use your barrel once. So this creates shortages when a lot of distilleries open up, and it creates a glut of barrels in the secondary market. I don't know if you talked about this on your show, but the Scottish have been buying a lot of distilleries. They bought Tuttletown here in New York, which was a kind of big thing, and others. And now that they have those distilleries, they can send those secondary barrels back to Scotland. And in Scotland, they're federally mandated to use used barrels. The Scotsman can't take my new barrel and call it Scotch whiskey. So, and this pertains to 6 of the 9 whiskeys that are produced in America. 6 of those 9 whiskeys say in their standard ingredients or standardizations that it must be aged in a new charred oak barrel. So this is why the shortages happened, and this is why there's people jockeying for these secondary use barrels. India, China, Japan, they don't have these regulations that we do, so maybe these secondary barrels can be, used in other markets.
This month's Impact Spotlight is on Nichnine. Founded by Annabelle Thomas, Nichnine has a pioneering approach to spirit making, putting innovation and sustainability at the forefront. Through Nichnine, Annabelle seeks to change the way the world thinks about whiskey from Scotland, and to create a whiskey which could exist in harmony with our planet and its inhabitants. Nichnine has created a spirit with exceptional body and sweetness, showcasing their smooth and elegant house style. This is achieved through a combination of sourcing high-quality organic Scottish barley, gentle fermentation and distillation processes, and maturation in a combination of 3 carefully selected cask types: ex-American whiskey casks, STR, shaved, toasted, and recharred casks that held red wine, and a small amount of Oloroso sherry casks. The result is flavors of lemon sherbet, juicy stone fruits, and spiced rye bread. This whiskey is set to disrupt the industry through Nichnine's commitment to sustainability and creative approach to distilling. With an uncompromising focus, the small team of eco-conscious drinks fanatics also dedicate 10% of their spirit production to trialing different yeasts not commonly found in whiskey distilling, all on their journey to seek out and find new flavors in their whiskey making. If you're a longtime listener, you know how interested I am in whiskeys and distilleries like this, and how excited I am that Impex is now bringing it stateside. Annabelle will be visiting Chicago for Whiskey and Barrel Night on October 25th, and will be hosting special masterclasses featuring the key components of Nichnine, along with their core organic single malts. These tastings will also include a sneak peek of Quiet Rebels Gordon. Only 630 bottles of the special one-time only release will be coming to the States, so it's a release and an event you won't want to miss. Nichnine Organic Single Malt is currently on its way to specialty retailers across the U.S. For more information and questions on where to buy, please contact the Impex Beverages office at office@impexbev.com and follow on social media to never miss a release. The Whiskey Ring podcast is proudly sponsored by Impex Beverages. It's actually preempted another one of my questions because I was wondering why the what's the word I'm looking for? I was wondering why there were the apparatus for koji fermentation and shoyu making, and we've talked about koji on the podcast in the past in association with Japanese whiskey.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I make when the pandemic, but I started making I was asked to start making koji trays, and then I developed my own Muro cabinet, which is a koji inoculator with a heater, humidifier, and regulator. It comes with 2 trays, and we send them all over the world. And in 48 hours, you get really good koji. Yeah, and I got involved with some of the people writing the books like a Koji Alchemy, and my friends who just wrote Fermenter, and a lot of people in the Koji movement. There was a vacuum at the time for somebody to be making the wooden accessories that go with Koji. And in Japan, that would have been made traditionally by the Coopers. And so I'm just continuing the tradition of cooperage into culinary. This might be a good time to talk about the different types of coopers. America has 3 different types of coopers. There are tight or wet coopers like myself, and that means you hold liquid, be it potable water or beer or alcohol. There are slack cooperages, and a slack barrel is, you've seen it in your supermarket where they hold the coffee beans, or maybe in the produce aisle. It's a very thin barrel, almost like a shingle. It might have a wire bands around it or a wooden strap. These were usually paper lined and used to send everything from cement to flour, to tobacco, to nails, and any dry goods were put in slack barrels: apples, lemons, fruits, grains. The slack barrel was a huge industry, even more so than the tight cooperage. The third cooper was known as a white cooper, and every town had a white cooper, and he is the one who made your domestic culinary items, from a bucket to a churn, and all types of utensils. Nowadays, we call utensils forks and knives, but our ancestors called anything in the kitchen really a utensil. So if you needed a spoon or a bowl or a bucket or a churn or a vessel, you would go to your local white cooper for that. So making the koji implements and these small open top fermenters goes hand in hand with Japanese coopers and their work with culinary. You guys are talking about koji for sake?
For sake, but also for shochu.
Yeah.
Takamine whiskey uses koji fermentation.
Uh-huh.
And there's also an awamori as well. But there's also, and I'm still trying to find more evidence of this, but some of the whiskey produced in Canada at Alberta is koji fermented.
Oh.
It's not a lot of it, but some of the products like Hochstadter's rye, and then the age stated lock, stock, and barrel releases, so the 13, the 18, and the 21-year-old are all koji fermented. Wow. Oddly enough, the blend is not, but the rest of them are.
I do hear you have to be careful because it can contaminate your facility.
Yes, it can.
And everything can be koji fermented. Yeah, so we did that, and we sell a lot of koji trays, and we make all custom sizes and custom cabinets for different people.
And with the a slightly different question, but it does have to do with whiskey, but it's not specific to it, which is, for example, it seems like every year or two from the whiskey side, we see a trend having to do with a barrel. So most recently, toasted barrels became a thing, using a toasted barrel with either no char or relatively low char, like a char level 1, as a secondary finishing or for additional finishing, or some like Michter's who toast all their barrels. But toasted barrel finishes became a trend for a while, more so in recoupering in Scotland using STR casks, so shaved, toasted, and recharred casks, things like that. When we as a consumer see a product that has, let's just go with the toasted barrel finish for argument's sake, when we as a consumer see that final product, it's not just there, like that's aged for a certain time in a toasted barrel. It's then you had to have the time before that where the toasted barrel was formed and created. Back to the idea. So as a cooper, from your side of things and from your perspective within that progression, if there's a trend in the industry having to do with barrels, at what point do you see that trend coming?
That's a good question. I mean, it seems like it happens more so in the larger scale distilleries and not so much in the smaller ones. There's a little bit of a misdirect there because all barrels are toasted. We have to toast them when they come out to set that lignin we talked about. So every barrel gets toasted and then it goes to get charred. And I feel confident that almost every cooperage toasts before charring. But I mean,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I think yeah, most do, but it gets to kind of a level of, how long do you toast for, and then
right.
also
And what we're doing when we're toasting too is, and I like to compare it to a marshmallow. All right. So when we put a marshmallow over a fire and that first pass gets a golden yellow, that's the sugar in the marshmallow getting toasted. And that's what we're doing with the wood. Those bundles of straws I talked about are filled with cellulose and hemicellulose, which are sugars. So when we toast that barrel, I'm not just setting the lignin, I'm toasting the sugar. If we take that marshmallow and pass it back over the fire and get that black outer layer, that's the char. But underneath that char is still the toasted marshmallow, and sort of the same with the barrel. So I think what they're doing with just the toasted barrel is probably getting a lot more sugar flavors or sweetness rather than just the constant char, which releases some of the sweetness, but I don't think all of it as strong as you get with a toast.
yeah, the toasted definitely gets. I'm thinking of the Michter's just because I have the toasted barrel rye from them from this year, and uh, from toasted oak, I always get that marshmallowy note, that
Right. So that's the
caramelized
sugar.
sugar. Yeah,
Yeah. Which can get lost under the char, even though it's there.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And the theory is that this started, even maybe in France with cognac and toasting the barrels to pull some of the sugars out of the wood. But we see that the toasting was used a lot longer before the charring came into play. So the toasting was a very common thing. I know my beer guys don't want me to char. I just keep a toast on it. We've been making some small beer foeders, and I've been toasting those just to get some of those sugars to come to the forefront, but not
for
give them
those,
the color change or the char taste.
if for products like that where you're just toasting, or let's say even not toasting, but where you're not charring the inside, do you have to treat the inside a certain way so you still don't get kind of
No,
any
no. In
roll?
a wine barrel is only toasted. A sherry cask is only toasted. There's many casks out there that only have a toast. Yeah.
So have you, with the distilleries that you're working with, have you had much opportunity to work with these kinds of different
We do something. Some
finishes?
people. I will sometimes toast with peat, even though I
Ooh,
know they do other stuff in Scotland. They don't really necessarily toast with the peat. And we had somebody who was adding a THC to their bar, or we were using hemp to toast with, because I don't know, it's not THC, whatever, it's the inactive ingredient. They were adding.
right.
Um, and I've made some cherry wood casks where I toasted with the cherry. One thing that my clients tell me separates me from others is that I don't use propane. So, we've all seen those great images online of the barrels at Jack Daniels, and they go into this room and it looks like, they open the gates of hell and the tongues
Right.
of fire come through it. And what that really is just a lot of propane. So,
Yeah.
and even though we grill with propane at home, so I just use wood cutoffs. I use my oak to toast and char with. And, if I toast that marshmallow using a propane torch and I toast that marshmallow over campfire, that campfire marshmallow is going to taste better. So, and there's been some studies about, what's left on the inside after the charring process and the chemicals there. So I don't use propane, and I think that adds a different flavor profile to my barrel because I only use oak.
And that goes back to, I think it goes back to what you were saying originally about wanting to move from furniture and fabrication into the barrels. You wanted to get away from the chemical aspect of it and using these things. And I agree. The those images of the flames just shooting out of the through the barrel. I mean, yeah, it's attractive. It catches the eye. It's certainly impressive.
Yeah.
Um, but I do wonder sometimes what is then being introduced into the wood because you're lighting a a molecule on fire to and then pushing it through that is not native to the wood itself. Whereas with you, you're lighting wood shavings and cuttings and I think using air, right, to vortex it through.
Right. So I create, everybody's like, how do you burn the wood? But you never really burning the wood when you see those videos where it looks like Sauron, is that trying
Right.
to that flame is shooting up into the barrel, but the barrel never really ignites. I always tell people I just have the barrel very close to it.
Mm.
Um, so I create a cyclone of flame inside the barrel and I get that up to like 1300 degrees. And when I shut the air off and I stop I allow air to rush in, that the fire immediately goes out because the barrel isn't necessarily on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just have it fire trapped into it. So, oh, I'm sorry. What was your question though? The chemicals. Yeah, I remember reading something in American Spirit, and I don't want to start talking about science that I don't know, and the word carcinogenic gets thrown around, but there is some sort of residue that they found on the interior of the barrel that wasn't the most pleasant. But I guess then you introduce high rated alcohol on top of that, so maybe that negates it. But I mean, we grill with propane. I'm not going to sit here and say, propane's evil. I'll go grill you up a great burger out back and we use propane. So, I mean,
Sure.
I do it because I'm a cooperage and I have tons of wood shavings and wood cutoffs that I need to do something with. So, um, we toast using the same oak and we char using the shavings. Yeah.
That's realistically, if you're using a more authentic traditional method, that's what they would have used anyway. They didn't have propane in the 17th, 18th century, 19th
They did
century.
not. No, yes, the Guinness cooperage was not. They didn't have propane. No,
Oh,
you're exactly right. Yeah, I mean, they were. Yeah, I mean, not that they were doing the best practices. I mean, there were also the beer guys were lining the barrels with, pitch, and doing all kinds of things, which is something I've been trying to find out more about. It's very interesting what they would do to the insides of the barrels. But yeah, right. So no, that kept me away from the chemical. Yeah, but it was more about like, atomizing lacquer and being in a spray booth and all those chemicals. So yeah, and again, I tried not to reinvent anything. And I'm using mid 20th century machinery, but I did not try to make any new techniques for some of the recouping. I am using some propane just because they're older barrels and I can't do it the same way. The recouping, what did you call it? I never heard that before. What is it?
oh, the
SLR.
STR.
STR. I like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's what I'm doing. I'm doing STR barrels. So the trick with doing STR is that the chime and the crows is already there, and I cannot destroy that with fire. When almost every cooperage chars, and you char and then you cut your crows, and that's why when you see a shot of the barrel, it's really clean up there, and then underneath it's black
Mm.
because they charred it first. So that makes the recouping a little bit trickier because the chime and the crows there is really the Achilles heel of the barrel, and there's not much meat there. So if I start to destroy that or carbonize it, I'm not going to get the head to sit.
That's true. I'm looking at. I have a bunch of staves
Yeah.
out. I
Yeah.
try to get a stave from every distillery I go to.
Oh, cool.
Um, Not everyone sells them, unfortunately, but some will go in the back and find you one if you ask.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. The around the crows and the chime, it's always cleaner, of course, outside where the slight rim that would be over the head and
Mhm.
exposed is not charred.
Right. And if they did that and charred it, that would just crumble. You have a very small lip there. So
Right.
that would really crumble away. So that just makes it a little trickier to do the same process with the STR.
Yeah, and I think so. That idea of SDR, I don't know if he created it, but he certainly popularized it. It was Scotch distiller and just brainiac, Dr. Jim Swan, who has since passed, but he introduced this as a way to kind of reinvigorate and make used casks more interesting in a way. So it would still qualify as a used cask by Scottish, Japanese, Indian regulations. In his case, also, Israeli, Taiwanese. I mean, he was all over the world.
Yeah.
But, by shaving away the quote unquote used char level, retoasting to recaramelize whatever might have been left afterwards, and then recharring, it's still a used cask, but it functions in many ways as a new cask.
Yeah, and that's
And
what we've been doing. And one of the reasons to scrape that away is to get back to some of the wood. So when you're toasting, you're down to some of the sugars there. A lot of the sugar has been extracted, but if you can shave down to the wood when you toast, you can get some more interaction with the sugars in the wood.
Right.
Yeah.
This was something you mentioned earlier about the terroir, and you'd also mentioned in a previous interview that I listened to just to prepare, which was that terroir was something, in your words, you knew existed, but wasn't sure exactly what it meant in the context of what you were doing. This was in 2019 or so, 2018, 2019. And now that you've had a couple more years using not only New York oak, but when you occasionally have to go out of state, what do you think about terroir now? Would you still call it terroir, or is it something larger?
I would call it so the word terroir means that there is a specific flavor to, let's say, a specific region, but we still haven't talked about what that flavor is. Is it salty? Is it sweet? We're just using this term terroir. And on one hand, I'm providing a local terroir to their product and their flavor profile, but what is that? Does it taste like socks? Does it taste like chili? Does it taste like coconut? You're getting hints of vanilla. And so one of the things, I guess, the feedback that I'm getting from my people is that the local New York wood, or the wood I'm using, it gives some vanilla tones and it's a little bit of like a coconut. So I guess if you wanted to say what's the terroir of New York-based oak, you could kind of needle it into that, But I think the term gets bandied around a lot, but there's no definition of it, Sure. You could say that there's a local flavor to New Orleans, and well, what is that flavor? Well, it's the flavor of New Orleans, but so I know what is the flavor. So it's sort of the same with the terroir. I'm giving you the local flavor of New York oak, but okay, but what is that? But we're finding out that I think the overall is that there's more vanilla, and it's not a spicy flavor or like a chili flavor. But that's just my feedback from my distillers, And the other thing is, some of my competitors say that they can clone a barrel, but to be realistic, if you see a stave mill or a place in Kentucky making 2,400 barrels a day, they're getting trees from everywhere. And some of those trees might have been on a very mineral-rich ridge, and some might have been in a valley, and they've all sucked up different minerals. So, you can't really clone a barrel if you have 25 different, trees in one barrel and everything. So, I mean, you can do the same process over and over again, but everything's good unless you're constantly buying oak from the same region or the same location. That's really going to taste different. That tree is absorbing the local minerals and water and whatever else is around it, and it lodges itself there in there. So everyone can be very different depending on where it is. Did it come from the northern Appalachians here in New York, or like you said, the Ozarks, or so there's going to be different flavors there. Whether one is better or not, I know the guys in the Midwest say that their oak tastes better because it grows in an even cycle, but how much of that is true, I really don't know. I decided that if I stayed traditional and not use the propane and not try to change anything up, then my barrels are going to taste just as good as they've tasted if anybody else was making them.
Yeah, I mean, I know some friends of mine, let alone people in the industry, in the whiskey industry, who would say they can taste the difference between, you know, ISC has these massive cooperages
Yes.
in Lebanon, in Lebanon, Missouri, I should say, not
Yeah.
Lebanon, the country, Lebanon, Missouri, but also one in Kentucky and I think one in Alabama, if I remember correctly. But the point being, they have multiple massive cooperages. So when you see something that's from ISC, you have to ask, okay, which ISC? And there are some people who can say, yeah, we can taste the difference between a barrel made in Missouri versus one made from the Alabama cooperage. And um, personally, I don't know so much about that. I find a difference certainly in wood type. I get a lot of difference. Like if you were using
Uh,
American, Quercus alba versus Quercus robur or Gariana. But
sure.
in terms of, I don't know, I'm kind of torn because there's also this theory,
Right.
if you're French, where terroir is everything in wine. You look at
Right.
the French forests, and each forest has its own profile. Plus, then there are different copses within those forests that have their own profile.
Yeah.
And you start tasting some of the wood from there, and you're like, wow, this actually does. But then I get, I don't know if it's suggestion or if it's actually there, but it's
Right.
thought
Yeah.
provoking. And
Yeah. And I'm not. I'm also a musician. I mean, there's a lot of people that have perfect pitch, or can really break down a song really good. And so I think there are people who can taste whiskeys and break down the flavors. Their senses are hyper active, the same way the person who has perfect pitch can tell that the doorbell is a C sharp. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are people who can tell those differences, who are tuned in and who study it. But yeah, I haven't met anybody. I would love to see a comprehensive, and I'm sure maybe ACAA has done it, but a comprehensive study of what New York barrels taste like. But there's not many people making New York barrels. Although, there's a lot coming out of Pennsylvania that goes to Napa for the wine, PA barrels. So yeah, but I've never really heard any studies, nor can I identify, an ISC barrel from mine. I'd be curious if somebody could identify my whiskey, like what they make at Stoutridge, and as opposed to there's a company up here, Taconic, that uses ISC barrels. Nothing wrong with that. That's what they use. So, but I'm wondering, what both of us are bringing to the party.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
it's very
there's
interesting, and it's very I find, I'm sorry, very intriguing.
no, I love talking about it, and I find myself coming back to that question of terroir versus sense of place versus any number of things, but it does come up quite often, and I like
Yeah,
exploring it.
yeah.
Um,
I think, with food, if let's say like a carrot or a truffle that's grown in France in the specific dirt, you're really right there. It's direct. You can taste it. But the
mhm.
barrel, the wood is aged for 3 years outside. It's gotten rained on, and then now it's aging alcohol. It's really gone through a lot. By the time it gets into your mouth, a lot
Right.
has gone on, as opposed to maybe like food or, livestock.
Right. I mean, once you're drinking a whiskey, you're talking about, let's say it was just minimum 24 months air dried wood, and then age 6 years. I mean, you're talking about a barrel and wood that was cut 8 years before. So does the
Yeah.
taste of the terroir of then, of now, how has it changed? It's a good point. It's difficult to trace that through. And I think when you compare it with wine, where you can age wine for a couple of months, maybe a year, you can go longer, but uh, the point being, you don't have to age it as long as whiskey.
Great.
So you can, yeah,
I'm so sorry. My dog was out back barking.
Oh, no worries.
Were you there? Sorry, I was trying to find a
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, no
Can you
worries. No worries.
mark it and edit this? You're all right.
Yeah, totally fine.
He was 2 minutes from coming over to this door and start barking.
All good.
Yeah. So the terroir, yeah. My main client uses my barrels because I use New York PA wood.
Mhm.
So part of his narrative is that, and that sets him apart from others or using mass produced, Ozark wood. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's, that helps him with his story. All these distilleries have their legends and lore and narrative. And I add that to his story. And we were talking about doing different things, talking about Stout Ridge. I built him a year ago an absinthe still. He's distilling absinthe in a wooden still that I made him. I'm very lucky that I have Steve at Stout Ridge and other distilleries who use me to, do weird things. Somebody said, you want to make a birch tank. So I made a birch tank, and we've made some cherry ones. And I'm not afraid to do stuff out of the lines as opposed to a larger barrel factory that has, automated assembly line and is not going to try to, make a cherry cask.
Sure. It's not worth their time. It would mess up their processes too much to do it.
Right. And I'm stupid enough to, but I like the challenge, and I want to be, and just before, like with doing custom fabrication, people would come all the time with something new and something different, and your shop had to pivot. And we're going to do this library with this stain or this color. You couldn't be like, oh, wait, what? So, my background in custom fabrication, and I invite that. I enjoy doing the different projects for people and trying different stuff.
Awesome. Well, for me, I mean, I have personally loved this conversation. I like learning more about the product. Of course, I'm coming at it from the whiskey perspective.
Sure.
But even beyond that, it's enlightening, I think, to hear and also to have this conversation. Like I said, a couple years into this podcast, so I can ask some. We get the basics of it and the traditional methods that you're using, which are different from these other cooperages, but there's also more that we can discuss in terms of give yourself enough credit. You got into the science pretty well on that with the tyloses and the different things like that. But
oh yeah, no, I do get it. Yeah. The science that I know is more based around the tree, the wood structure, not necessarily the product that comes out of the barrel. Yeah,
sure,
that's right. And no, it's great. I love talking about it, and I really enjoy, the history of it. And it's a shame. I mean, it's all going to kind of go away soon and just be automated, but that's happening with a lot of trades, upholstery and woodworking. So it's just the way it's going.
well, for at least for now, we've got coopers like you to
Yeah.
give us some new things, some interesting things. And yeah, I hope I'll make my way up there, maybe come on site one day, see what you're doing
Oh, get up here.
firsthand.
Yeah, we're an hour and a half away. Yeah, you're right
Yeah,
down the river.
we love going up the Hudson Valley. So
Yeah, I just moved
absolutely.
into a new space. Yeah, well, I'd love to have you up. There's a uh, there's a new brewery that Jan Wenner built up here, and a distiller from the city is getting ready to move up, and there's a lot going on up here. So we're very excited.
Awesome. Well,
Come up, want to do a show on location? We'll get a bunch of people together, and we'll
just did that with yeah, just did that with Black Button up in Rochester. So
right,
it was a
those
lot of
guys.
fun.
Yeah, they've built quite a new operation up there, haven't they?
Yeah, I got to tour it, to look through, take pictures. Some of the areas where it's the last pictures that anyone's going to be able to take in there, because you're in areas where there's going to be super high alcohol content, to the point where you can't have anything with a static charge entering the room.
Yeah, right.
So
Setting fires around there.
no, definitely not. That's going to be on the other side of the parking lot. for sure.
Yeah. No, Jason's very impressive, and what they've built is very nice.
That's awesome. So I know I have more research to do because I want to learn more, and I'll ask you those questions when I come up on site. We get to talk more and walk through.
I'd love to come back on. I love talking about all this stuff.
100%. And even though I won't be able to attend the event, I'll definitely be talking about it. I want people to go support you, support Kings County.
I do this lecture probably about 10 times a year. So, and it is on YouTube also. But I'll make sure to let you know when I'm doing it again.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So with that, hang on with me for a second after I stop recording to just close a few things out. But in the meantime, hope you all have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. Again, we've got John Cox. He's here from Quercus Cooperage up in High Falls, New York, up the Hudson Valley. And I have a lot of follow-up to do to learn more, taste more. Got to talk to Stoutridge because I haven't talked to them yet.
You got to talk to Steve, man. He's the mad scientist.
Absolutely.
You got to talk to Steve.
And there'll be more to come. We'll definitely do an on-site at some point. And with that, everyone, thanks for listening. There will be links to social media, to the website, to events, all in the show notes. So you can click right from the show notes to those events, and to make sure you're following John on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere he is. And with that, it's been another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast, and I'll see you all next week. Hey folks, thanks for listening to another episode of the Whiskey Ring Podcast. If you like what you hear, please go ahead and click that subscribe, follow, or like button. Leave a rating and review on your podcast app of choice, and let me know what you want to hear. You can reach out to me through the podcast apps or email me at david@whiskeymyweddingring.com with any suggestions or ideas for new show guests. You can also support the podcast at patreon.com/whiskeymyweddingring. That's whiskey with an E, for as little as $1 a month. $5 a month gets you access to bonus content, including our soon-to-resume Under the Influencer series, and $25 a month means you join the Barrel Share Club. Each month, Barrel Share Club members get to try products sent to me for review, bottles from my own collection, and sometimes bottles that I just pick up because they're fun or interesting. Right now, only 5 spots remain in the Barrel Share Club, so grab your place today. Finally, please follow on Instagram. You can follow me at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or at Whiskey Ring Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Whiskey Ring. You can follow on Facebook at Whiskey My Wedding Ring or join the Facebook group, the Whiskey Ringers group. And I hope to see you there. Cheers, thank you for the support, and see you next time.